Well, welcome again to our Sunday School Hour for Graceway Baptist Church. It's that time again where we make preparations for Sunday, and this Sunday's lesson will be August 18th, 2024. And we've entitled it, Yahweh Provides Again. And isn't that the way God is? He doesn't simply just provide salvation for us. And I don't mean to say that like that's nothing or that's not really all that big a deal. That is the ultimate, actually. And may God forgive us when we act like, well, He saved me, but what I really need is a new car. You may actually need the car, and He does provide things like that. But we need to stop and say, boy, the ultimate thing, if God did not spare His own Son, Paul says, how shall He not freely give us all things? Now with that, He's a good Father. He knows what's good for us. He knows what we need and what we just want. Big difference between a need and a want. And He provides for us in so many ways. And I always liked Ray Comfort when he talked about the way of the master technique of witnessing. And he would interview people and he said, here you blaspheme the God that gave you air to breathe, the God that causes your heart to beat and gives you mobility, all of that. We don't think about those kind of things much, do we? But God gives us every single day what is necessary for life. In fact, He gives us life itself, and He gives us His presence, His Spirit, and He ordains our steps. He gives us strength and power. He gives us His own armor to wear and to fight against the enemy. He brings victory into our lives. And all of this in heaven too. So when we think about God being the provider, don't think about the material side of things above the spiritual. Think of the spiritual things and then recognize the material things are kind of a byproduct of all of that. And even as we're going to find out here in relationships, because as we move to the part of Abraham's life where we are very near the end, he's an old man now, and so we have the introduction. The life and story of Abraham was incredible. There was undeniable a supernatural element in Abraham's life, right? Think about the call of God for him to leave his ancestral land. How hard would that be? That would be in those days very, very difficult, because that was your tribe. That was your nation state or city state or village state, as it might be. They didn't have big nations like we do now, except for maybe Egypt or some of those type of things. But most people just lived in clans, tribes, that type of thing. And so to leave that was, well, it was dangerous for one thing. You didn't have the other people in your clan to protect you. And then think about the promises that were made to Abraham. I'm going to take you and make you just this one single man who had a wife, and I'm going to bless you, and you're going to have a lot of camels, goats, gold and silver, and servants, that type of thing. Well, that's a good deal, but why do I have to leave my ancestral land for all of that? Well, God said, let me finish the story, because your descendants are going to inhabit this land that I am going to give you, and they're going to be set apart. They're going to be different than all the nations and all the families of the earth. In fact, they're going to be so different and so special that through them, all the families on earth are going to be blessed. And so Abraham says, boy, that just really sounds good to me, except year after year after year after year after year, and we could go on for a long time with those years, Abraham didn't have any children. No birth announcement, no conception, no bouncing baby boy running around in here. How in the world is this going to take place? And you can also think about the times when Abraham kind of goofed up, and God intervened, didn't He? With Pharaoh and with Abimelech, just the supernatural intervention of God. And then there was that day when Sarah says, I think I might be pregnant. And what happens as time goes by? It's confirmed. Sure enough, she is. And there's a bouncing baby boy way, way, way past the time that Sarah should have conceived or given birth. And this is the promised one, the promised child for all of the covenants that God had made with Abraham. So the supernatural is always there. But I also want you to consider something else. When God called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, he said, I want you to leave and go over here to the land of, well, he didn't even tell him yet, but as we know, it was the land of Canaan. So could God have just simply went, and Abraham is there? Yeah, he did. But he didn't do that. Abraham had to still load wagons. Abraham had to stop and camp every night on the way to Canaan. Abraham had to kill animals for food, and bread had to be baked, and water had to be gathered because they were in a desert area. It was a difficult trip. And so you see the combination of the supernatural. God calls, and then they go, and it takes a long time to get there. Think about with the birth of Isaac. God waits until Sarah is too old to conceive children. And yet he causes that to happen supernaturally. Couldn't he just have said, zap, here's Isaac, meet your baby boy? Yes, he could have. But did he? No. Sarah had to go through the trimesters. And you ladies especially know the difference between that first trimester and the last trimester. And Sarah had morning sickness and all of that, I would assume. She had the aches and the pains that go with it. And then think about being her age and going through labor and delivery, especially in those days. So the combination of the supernatural and then natural everyday life is just prevalent throughout the life of Abraham and other places in the Bible. And so when we look at all of this, and we see the intervention of God and the sovereign work of God, God working in ways that are unimaginable, in ways that are far beyond anything we could ask or think or even conceive, then also God says, but I work in the normal, natural, everyday things of life. So, as we think about this and go through this story, let's not think of God's sovereignty as only being in the, ooh, wow, that was something moments. God does do those mind-blowing things when there's no real earthly, natural explanation, and yet it happens. That's a wonderful thing. But let's not forget God is also sovereign, like right now. Why am I doing this, and why does this technology work? Why are you able to watch this? Why are you called to be a teacher and to present this material? Well, this is all a part of the sovereignty of God. And I'm sorry, I'm not the Apostle Paul sitting here explaining all of this to you. That would be nice. And you're not Apollos or somebody like that sitting there. We are here today because God has ordained for us to be here. And we came about through the natural means of reproduction after generation after generation after generation. Here we are. And so God is just as sovereign in the normal, ordinary, everyday things of life as He is the big, wow, supernatural, miraculous things that happen in our life as well. And so our theme is going to be that Yahweh provides, but how does He do it? And He does it, of course, through His sovereignty and through His power. So let's start reading in our text here. And again, this is Genesis chapter 24, and we'll be looking at verses 10 through 21. And so the scripture says, beginning in verse 10, of course, then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, for all his master's goods were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia. Have you ever heard of that? That's where they tell us the Fertile Crescent is, where all of life began, but not by evolution, but by the creation of God. And that's where Abraham was from. And to the city of Nahor. Nahor was Abraham's brother. This is the place that he lived, and apparently he was very prominent in that city. Now, verse 11 says, "And he made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. Then he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of this city are coming out to draw water." They usually did that in a group for safety. Verse 14, "Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will give your camels, 10 of them, a drink. Let her be the one that you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." And it happened that this is interesting, before he finished speaking, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her pitcher on her shoulder. Now the young woman was very beautiful to behold, a virgin, no man had ever known her. And she went down to the well, filled her pitcher, and came up. And the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please, let me drink a little water from your pitcher." And so she said, "Drink, my lord." And then she quickly set her pitcher down to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking." Then she quickly emptied her pitcher to the trough and ran back to the well to draw water and drew for all the camels. Remember, there were 10 of them. And the man, wondering at her, remained silent so as to know whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. So, interesting story. Sovereignty of God, praise chance, right there in the middle of the desert in this situation. He just shows up and he runs into Rebekah. Now he needs to know, is she the right one? Now she's beautiful and she meets the qualifications because she is a virgin. She's not been married. She doesn't belong to any other man. Boy, that phrase would make the feminists mad, wouldn't it? So he prays this prayer, and notice that even before he finishes the prayer, God seems to know what to do and how to answer the prayer. I've said this several times. I don't know how many people are listening, but I hear people say a lot, "Tell me how to pray specifically for you." Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Please hear me. Nothing wrong with that. But my question is, why? Is it because you think that if you don't get every word right and every detail covered, God won't answer the prayer? That's frankly superstitious. That's not the God that we serve. But if you're praying that way so that you know when the prayer is answered, that's a big difference. So this man Eliezer is praying about this in a specific way because he needs the knowledge. And he needs to know when God has answered the prayer. Not because God is going in heaven and go, "How shall we do this, Eliezer?" And Eliezer says, "Oh, I got a great plan. Let's try this." Notice, before he finishes speaking, this all goes into operation. So, the number one, the sovereignty of God involves people who are known and unknown. So, we think about what's happening here, and we look at the first few verses of this story, and he's going to a place he's never been. He's going to encounter people he's never met, and hopefully bring back a bride for Isaac. And you remember that Abraham had told him, because he asked the question, well, what if I find someone who meets all the qualifications, but she doesn't want to come? And then Abraham said, well, if that's the case, then you are free from the oath that you have made to me. Well, Eliezer doesn't want that to happen, neither does Abraham. And also, we can tell by the story, neither does God. It's God's plan to answer all of that. So he goes and he stops by a well. Now, a well was kind of a social gathering, a social center for people in that day. Why? Because they lived in the desert. Water was very important. And I don't know exactly why, but it was the woman's job to draw water from the well and also to take care of the livestock. And so Rebekah shows up and Eliezer comes to her, not knowing anything about her or anything like that. And he says, please, while you've got that water there that you've drawn, may I have a drink? She gives him a drink. And then without him saying anything else to her, she said, and while you're getting something to drink, let me get water for your camels also. This is a mind-boggling thing. Wasn't there a commercial where I think Pilgrim Chicken or something like that? He said it's a mind-boggling thing. Well, that's what's happening here. And so this is him praying for success, and this is him saying, this is what I'm going to be looking for. And notice how quickly it happened. Doesn't always happen that quickly. I have a lot of prayers where God just doesn't seem to answer. Well, actually he does. He's saying wait, isn't he? And then there are those times when the answer comes just so fast, it really does blow your mind. And it shouldn't surprise us, but it does. So when you think about it, Eliezer, Abraham, and Isaac, these are well known, and we expect them to be in the story. Abraham's too old to make this journey. Abraham is advanced in years. The time of his death is coming up. And so he gets Eliezer to help him out. We get that. But Rebekah, we have no idea who she is. We don't know who she's going to be. We don't know how this man is going to find her. I mean, go to this city and find a bride. Now, how do you do that? Do you have to attend parties? Do you have to meet with family members? Do you have to go to the want ads or something like that? How is this going to happen? Well, here we see it, and it happens in a very unique way here. And notice that the daughters of the men of the city, our text says, are going to come. Now, this is a reminder that, first of all, he's got multiple young ladies to look at. How in the world is he ever going to know? And secondly, being designated as daughters of the men of the city, he's going to have their father's approval. It's not like in our day. He's going to have the father's approval to do this. So several things have to happen. He's got to have the right girl. He's got to have a family that will allow her to leave with him to go be Isaac's wife. And so this is an overwhelming thing. But you'll notice here a specific place, a specific time, a specific situation. So what are the odds that this particular woman shows up and shows impressive hospitality that lines up with Eliezer's prayer, and her family even turns out to be agreeable? I mean, this is just too good to be true. This doesn't happen. And so we find here a little amazing thing about the sovereignty of God. Secondly, the sovereignty of God clarified the will of God. You see, God was not just going, well, this one will do, and I think she and her family will work out, so let's choose her. No, Rebekah was chosen beforehand, and then the will of God had to be revealed, or Eliezer would have gotten it wrong 10 times out of 10, like us. And so the sovereignty of God clarified the will of God. Which woman is it? And God's divine control of Rebekah, of her thoughts, of her timing, of the need of Eliezer, and all of that comes together all at the right time and the right place. As you've heard it said before, it is rigged, isn't it? And so he prays this, and before it's out of his mouth, then all of a sudden this stuff like dominoes falling over, it begins to happen. So think about this, and notice his concern is his master, kindness for my master. He doesn't want to let Abraham down. Now, if you'll remember, Eliezer is the one before Abraham had children. Eliezer was going to inherit the whole kit and caboodle. And he doesn't now because Isaac is going to be the heir of everything. And now Eliezer is going to find a bride for the guy that replaced him, right? He must have had tremendous love and respect for his master Abraham. So he prays here for guidance, as we all should. We shouldn't just think the sovereignty of God, oh, whatever happens will happen. That's more fatalistic. We're walking with God. We're praying to the Lord. We're pouring out our needs, our concerns, and our desires before Him, and trusting Him that He'll answer it in the right way. So the confirmation came, and it comes by the actions of young Rebekah. And she's not waking up that morning saying, oh, dear Lord, let there be a man with 10 camels at the well. I don't think that's included in here because that's not really on her mind. And yet she is being controlled by a sovereign God from her heart and her hospitality and all of that type of thing. And so notice here, he didn't just simply assume, hey, there's a pretty one. Isaac would like her. And she's the first one to come up. Let's get this over with. Let's get on the camels and let's go home. He wanted to know the will of God and wanted to make sure that he was doing the will of God. And then amazingly, what she did matched his prayer. Now notice the phrase, the one you have appointed. So not just anyone is going to do. It's got to be the one that God has appointed, the one that God has chosen. And so not anyone else is going to do. This is a specific wife that is divinely chosen to carry on this covenant that has been made with Abraham and now is going to be given to Isaac as well. So you see how crucial all of this is. Thirdly, notice the sovereignty of God is far beyond mere coincidence in verses 15 through 17. Now, I remember one time here at Graceway, a young man came to me and he said, I think I found the person that I'm supposed to marry. Now, as he described her, I had a few red flags that came up and I shared them with him. And he said, no, I believe this is God's will because I wasn't looking for her. She wasn't looking for me. It turned out we liked some of the same things. We had some other things in common. And so he ended up marrying her, and it was an absolute disaster. Because some people assume that if it was just a coincidence, then it must be the will of God because God is sovereign. Well, my thought is, if I were the devil, then I would set up all kinds of coincidence. I don't know what the plural of that is, coincidences. And I would lead you astray just by the sheer coincidence because you make an assumption it must be God because it seems right to me. And it goes way beyond that. This is not just something that just happened to fit. This is something that is absolutely directed by God, even down to the time, the place, and the entire situation here. And so Rebekah comes in. She just happens to be very beautiful to behold. She happens to be unattached. And so when she goes down to the well and fills her pitcher and she comes back up with it, then Eliezer runs to meet her. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? And said, please let me drink a little water from your pitcher. And before he finished speaking here, this is all taking place. Isn't that kind of a cool thing to think of? God immediately affirms what is the prayer of his heart. So he's not just looking for something coincidental to match up. He's actually praying. He's actually seeking the will and the mind of God, fully ready to stop if God leads him to stop, or to have everything just fall apart. I mean, what if the young lady comes up and he says, give me a drink, and she says, get it yourself? Or what if she gives him water to drink and never mentions the camels or anything like that? Is he going to just kind of settle for it? Well, 3 out of 4 ain't bad, kind of thing. Or is he going to be very specific about this? And so before he finished speaking, this begins to work. It reminds me of Matthew chapter 6, verse 8. Do not be like them when we pray, he's talking about, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. So he's not just saying, tell me what you want, I'm not real sure. This is different than that. He knows. So she happens to be then the exact one chosen by God in answer to his prayer, but more importantly, according to the divine purposes of God. Eliezer had no clue. Rebekah had no clue what was about to happen. He didn't know she was the one for sure until things worked out the way they did. And she had no idea she was going to be taken off to be the wife of the covenant man of God named Isaac, right? So this is the work and the plan of God. It's not just something that happened to come together. In fact, if you take any detail of this story and pull it out, it's like pulling a thread out of a tapestry or something. It all falls apart. It doesn't work, and they never meet. But here's the cool thing. They did meet. This was all the work of God. In Psalm 135, verses 5 and 6, the psalmist says, for I know that the Lord is great, and our Lord is above all gods. Whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and on earth. That's the God that we serve. And I've told single people, look, your job is not finding the right one. Your job is avoiding the wrong ones, right? Well, that's what Eliezer is doing here. All of the daughters of the men of the city are coming out. I don't know how many that was, but it was a lot of people. And there were a lot of chances for him to do something wrong. There were a lot of opportunities for him to make a colossal mistake and be an abject failure in this. And that's why he prays to the Lord, direct me and make it so I can see and understand what's going on and who the right person is, or I'll miss it every time. And so that's what he does, and that's what God does, and he brings it all together. And so he avoided all the wrong ones by being led to the right one at the first time. That would be nice if God would do that with a lot of people, wouldn't it? Somebody said, I kissed a lot of frogs before I met my handsome prince, right? So we come to the last point. Number 4 is the sovereignty of God is evident, but still mysterious. In fact, one writer put it this way, God is sovereign, but we can't always see it right now. We see it when we look back on things. Now, sometimes it's easier to see the sovereignty of God 10, 20, 30 years ago. Boy, if my grandpa hadn't done this and my parents hadn't done this, I wouldn't be here now. We can see all of that coming together. But at the same time, sometimes we don't see what's happening today as being the sovereign work of God, but we might see it tomorrow. Sometimes it's just pretty quick. But it almost always is something that we don't see in the moment, but we see it in the past. Near or far, we look back on it, we can see the hand of God. And so she said, drink, my Lord. And then she quickly let her pitcher down to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until, look how long this is going to go, they have finished drinking. And then she quickly emptied her pitcher into the trough. In other words, she's making multiple trips from the well to the drinking trough for the camels, from the well to the drinking trough of the camels, and ran back to the well to draw water and to draw for all of his camels. And verse 21 says, and the man, wondering at her, amazed at her, remained silent so as to whether the Lord had made the journey prosperous or not. He's waiting, and he's going to be doubly sure on the whole thing, because in Eliezer's mind, he could have said, this could be an answered prayer, this could be a setup from the enemy. This could be an answered prayer, this could be just mere coincidence, it would be used to lead me astray. So he's still waiting, still watching, still paying attention, and still exercising prudence here. Romans 11:33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God! How unsearchable are His judgments and His ways past finding out." So this is something that we ought to be cautious about, because His ways being past finding out, we're not know-it-alls. We don't understand the smallest thing about God and the way that He works. Now, we're growing in that, but we're a long way from being perfect in that. And so this whole thing here is an expression of God's wisdom and of God's knowledge. In Psalm 139, 5 and 6, "You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high, I cannot attain to it." In Proverbs 16:9 it says, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." Isn't that great? Proverbs 21:1, "The king's heart, even the king's heart, is in the hand of the Lord, and like the rivers of water, He turns it wherever He wishes." And then we think about even when life is bad and when life is hard, like in the life of Joseph being sold into slavery, being thrown into prison as an innocent man. He says in Genesis 50:20 to his brothers, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about as it is this day, to many people alive." So the sovereignty of God is an amazing thing, something that we can't quite understand, something that we don't always recognize, and yet it is always in operation in good times as well as difficult times. And that's why we are to walk by faith and not by sight, because it doesn't always look like it is the sovereignty of God. It doesn't always look like it's a good thing, but it always turns out that way. So let's conclude. Number one, believers have a responsibility to line up their thoughts and actions with the sovereignty of God and the revealed will of God. That's why we've got to fill our minds with the Bible. That's why we've got to be walking with God, and we've got to line up our thoughts with His thoughts and our hearts with His heart. There are a lot of times we waste our time praying because we're trying to get God to change. And remember, He doesn't change. He doesn't need to. He's an all-knowing, perfect God, and so He always does what's right. It's we who need to get in line with Him. Number two, believers will be led by the sovereignty of God, both with or without their understanding or full knowledge. Now, if you wait until you understand it all before you act, you're never going to go anywhere and you're never going to move. But God does things even when we're completely ignorant, just like Eliezer was. He had no idea who Rebekah was. He had no idea about her family. He had no idea about her heart and her willingness or anything like that at all. And so, but God still directed him. And even when Abraham left the Ur of the Chaldees, he didn't know where he was going, but God directed him. Number three, believers are called to willing surrender and faithfulness, knowing that God's sovereignty is always at work. Boy, if we could rest in that, to know that even when things go wrong, God's still in control. To know that when things go right, I don't have to forget God and take all the credit. My pride would like to, and so would yours, but it's not. We are not self-made men. There's no such thing as a man who pulls himself up by his own bootstraps. That's kind of impossible anyway, isn't it? It's always by the will and the plan and the purpose of God. Well, I made such great decisions and I've got a lot of money and a lot of prestige. Well, who do you suppose led you in that way and even gave you the option to do those type of things? Some of the things the health and wealth preachers preach would never work in India. They would never work in the slums of Mumbai. But they work here in America because we have a different situation. Now, why is it that we live in America? That's the sovereignty of God. Had nothing to do with us. We didn't choose it. God is sovereign over that. Why do you meet somebody and have the chance to do something for them and then tell them about Jesus? It's called a divine appointment. It's the sovereignty of God. So we need to rejoice in that and understand it. We need to be engaged with God as He controls our lives, or we're going to be very frustrated. And we need to do it all for the glory of God, because He's at work whether we see it or not. Even your bad decisions and even the times when other people have done wrong to you, think about what Joseph said. God still, Romans 8:28's it, and makes it something that is good. He's the God who brings beauty out of ashes, and He's the God who restores the years that the locusts have eaten. God is God, and we are not. We've got to get that figured out. So thank you for your time, and use this to evaluate your own life, and may God bless you as you learn, as you grow, as you study, and as you teach for His glory. God is sovereign, period. Thank you, and we'll see you next week as the story continues.